In the summer of 1993, archaeologists working on a remote plateau high in the Altai Mountains discovered something that would rewrite our understanding of ancient Eurasian cultures. Beneath layers of permafrost that had remained frozen for 2,400 years, they found an elaborate tomb containing a young woman whose body had been preserved perfectly by ice. She wore silk imported from China, a towering headdress decorated with gold, and her skin was covered with intricate tattoos of mythical animals. 6 horses in full ceremonial regalia lay buried beside her. But this wasn't simply an extraordinary archaeological find. Local people believed she was a guardian spirit whose disturbance would bring catastrophe. Within months of removing her from the frozen tomb, the region experienced devastating earthquakes. Scientists fell mysteriously ill. The helicopter transporting her body nearly crashed. Now, DNA analysis has finally revealed who she really was, where she came from, and why her people went to such extraordinary lengths to bury her in the most remote location they could find. This is the story of the Ice Princess of Ukok, a shaman priestess whose frozen body has preserved secrets about an ancient civilization that vanished from history. The Ukok Plateau sits at the intersection of Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia, a windswept highland over 8,000 feet above sea level, where temperatures plunge to minus 50 degrees Celsius in winter. In summer 1993, Russian archaeologist Dr. Natalia Polosmak led an expedition to investigate burial mounds scattered across this desolate landscape. The mounds, called kurgans, had been built by the Pazyryk people, a nomadic culture that flourished in the region around 400 BCE. Most kurgans had been looted centuries ago, their treasures stolen by grave robbers, who left only fragments. But Dr. Polosmak's team noticed something unusual about one particular mound. Its construction suggested it hadn't been disturbed. More significantly, the mound sat in a slight depression, where water collected and froze, creating a lens of permafrost that might have preserved whatever lay beneath. The excavation began with careful removal of stones covering the mound. Beneath the stones, they found layers of logs forming a roof over the burial chamber. As they dug deeper, the ground temperature dropped noticeably. They'd reached the permafrost, a layer of permanently frozen earth that had kept the tomb at freezing temperatures for over 2 millennia. Breaking through frozen ground without damaging potential contents required patience and ingenuity. The team used buckets of hot water, carefully melting ice while controlling temperature to avoid thermal shock that might damage fragile organic materials. Days passed as they slowly revealed the burial chamber's outline. Then the top of a massive log coffin emerged from the ice. The coffin had been carved from a single enormous larch log, hollowed out to create a chamber large enough for a human body. Its surface bore intricate carvings of animals, deer with elaborate antlers, felines with curved tails, mythical creatures combining features of different species. The craftsmanship demonstrated sophisticated artistic traditions and considerable time investment in funeral preparations. Lifting the coffin's heavy lid required mechanical assistance and extreme caution. As it rose, a remarkable scent wafted out, the unmistakable aroma of herbs and plants used in ancient preservation practices. Inside, wrapped in fur and felt, lay a woman's body in extraordinary condition. The freezing temperatures had essentially mummified her, preserving soft tissues, skin, and even internal organs. Her position was deliberate and ceremonial, lying on her right side, knees slightly bent, hands positioned near her face. She wore elaborate clothing, a long silk blouse, a wool skirt, and felt stockings. Most striking was her tall headdress, constructed from felt and horsehair, rising nearly 3 feet from her head. The headdress was decorated with gold foil shaped into stylized animal figures. But what truly astonished the archaeologists were her tattoos. Covering both arms and extending across her shoulders and back were intricate blue-black designs depicting fantastical creatures. The tattoos showed exceptional artistry, each line precisely executed, creating complex patterns that combined realistic animal anatomy with mythological elements. These weren't crude markings, but sophisticated body art, requiring considerable skill to create. Around the coffin, the team discovered 6 horses, also perfectly preserved by ice. The horses had been buried in full ceremonial regalia, leather bridles decorated with gold, felt saddles, and elaborate headdresses similar to the woman's. The presence of so many horses indicated this burial was for someone of exceptional importance. In Pazyryk culture, horses represented wealth and status. Sacrificing 6 valuable animals demonstrated the community's respect for the deceased. The burial chamber's construction revealed sophisticated understanding of preservation. After placing the body and horses, the Pazyryk people had filled the chamber with stones and sealed it. Water seeping into the chamber had frozen, creating an ice lens that maintained constant freezing temperatures even during summer. Whether this preservation was intentional or fortunate accident remains debated, but the result was a time capsule, preserving a moment from 400 BCE with unprecedented clarity. As conservators carefully cleaned and examined the Ice Princess's preserved skin, the full extent and complexity of her tattoos became apparent. This wasn't simple decoration, but an elaborate artistic and spiritual statement, covering much of her body, in interconnected designs that told a coherent visual story. The dominant motif was a fantastical deer or elk with elaborate antlers that transformed into stylized tree branches. The creature's body showed realistic musculature and anatomical understanding, but its features combined natural and mythological elements. The antlers spiraled and branched in patterns that suggested both actual deer anatomy and symbolic representation of tree-of-life imagery common across ancient Eurasian cultures. Alongside the deer appeared a snow leopard or similar big cat, depicted in a prowling posture with tail curved upward. The feline's spots were rendered as individual circular designs, and its facial features showed careful attention to detail. The cat's position relative to the deer suggested either pursuit or possibly guardian roles, depending on interpretation. Most intriguing were the hybrid creatures, combining features from multiple animals. One design showed a creature with a raptor's head and talons, but a quadruped's body, possibly representing shamanic beliefs about transformation or spirit animals. Another combined fish and mammal features, perhaps referencing beliefs about water spirits or creatures from mythology. The tattoo's execution demonstrated sophisticated technical skill. Creating such precise lines on living skin required steady hands, sharp implements, and considerable time. Analysis suggested the tattoos had been applied using bone needles and pigment derived from soot or charcoal mixed with liquid, probably animal fat or plant juice. The process would have been painful and time-consuming, suggesting the tattoos held deep significance worth enduring considerable discomfort. The tattoo's placement on arms and shoulders, areas visible when wearing typical Pazyryk clothing, indicated they were meant to be seen and recognized by others. In shamanic traditions across Siberia and Central Asia, tattoos often served as spiritual passports, identifying the bearer to supernatural entities and facilitating journeys between the physical and spirit worlds. The Ice Princess's elaborate body art suggested she held a spiritual role requiring such identification. Pazyryk artistic traditions show strong connections to broader Scythian art styles found across the Eurasian steppes. The animal style emphasized dynamic poses, flowing lines, and fantastical combinations of real and imagined creatures. But each cultural group developed distinctive variations. The Ice Princess's tattoos represent a refined example of Eastern Scythian artistic tradition, showing both technical mastery and creative vision. Modern tattooing has rediscovered ancient techniques through experimental archaeology. Contemporary artists attempting to recreate Pazyryk-style tattoos report that achieving the precision and density visible on the Ice Princess requires extreme skill. The artist who created her tattoos was clearly a master craftsperson, probably specializing in this art form. The symbolic meaning of specific animals in the tattoos connects to Pazyryk's spiritual beliefs. Deer represented grace, swiftness, and connection to forest spirits. Snow leopards symbolized power, independence, and mountain domains. Hybrid creatures represented shamanic transformation, the ability to take on animal characteristics or communicate with animal spirits. Together, the tattoos created a visual narrative about spiritual power and connection to the natural world. Some researchers suggest the tattoos served medicinal or therapeutic purposes. In traditional Chinese medicine and various indigenous healing systems, specific body locations correspond to energy channels or organ systems. Tattooing these points might have been believed to treat ailments or enhance vitality. The Ice Princess's medical history, revealed through later analysis, showed she suffered from chronic pain, possibly making such therapeutic tattooing relevant. The survival of these tattoos provides rare direct evidence of ancient body art traditions. While historical texts mention tattooing among various ancient peoples, actual preserved examples are extremely rare. The Ice Princess's tattoos offer a unique window into how ancient Eurasian peoples used their bodies as canvases for artistic and spiritual expression. The Ice Princess's clothing and accessories revealed sophisticated textile production, extensive trade networks, and complex social hierarchies within Pazyryk culture. Each item represented considerable labor, skill, and access to resources from across Eurasia. The silk blouse she wore came from China, demonstrating that trade along what would later be called the Silk Road was already well established by 400 BCE. The silk's weave pattern and dye suggested production in central China, meaning it had traveled over 1,000 miles to reach the Altai Mountains. Silk was extraordinarily valuable. Producing it required specialized knowledge of sericulture, and transporting it across such distances involved multiple intermediaries. That the Ice Princess was buried in imported silk indicated both her high status and her culture's participation in long-distance trade. Her wool garments showed equally impressive craftsmanship. The skirt was made from fine wool felt, produced by a labor-intensive process of cleaning, carding, and felting sheep's wool. The felt had been dyed a rich burgundy color using plant-based dyes that had remained vivid for over 2 millennia. The color's intensity suggested either exceptional dye knowledge or post-burial chemical processes that preserved pigments unusually well. The most spectacular element of her attire was the towering headdress. Standing nearly 3 feet tall, it was constructed from felt, shaped over a wooden frame, covered with horsehair extensions, and decorated with gold foil cutouts depicting stylized cats, possibly snow leopards. Creating such an elaborate headdress required multiple craftspeople with different specializations: woodworkers for the frame, felt makers for the body, metal workers for the gold decorations. The headdress proclaimed status and possibly spiritual authority, marking its wearer as exceptional within the community. Her footwear consisted of soft leather boots reaching mid-calf, made from deer or similar animal hide. The boots were lined with fur for warmth and decorated with small glass beads, probably imported from Mediterranean regions or Central Asia. The presence of glass beads demonstrated participation in trade networks spanning thousands of miles, connecting the Altai Mountains to distant production centers. Personal items buried with her included a small leather pouch attached to her belt. Inside were coriander seeds and a small mirror made from polished bronze. The mirror's origin was uncertain. It might have been produced locally or imported from China or Central Asia. Mirrors held symbolic significance in many ancient cultures, associated with shamanic practices, divination, or simply as valuable status objects. Most controversially, the pouch also contained cannabis seeds and what appeared to be a small container of processed cannabis. This discovery sparked considerable debate about the Ice Princess's role and Paziric cultural practices. Cannabis grows wild in the Altai region and was known to ancient peoples for both practical applications, fiber production, and psychoactive properties. The presence of processed cannabis in a burial context suggested ritual or medicinal use. Historical accounts from Herodotus describe Scythian peoples using cannabis in funeral ceremonies, creating enclosed spaces where they would heat cannabis seeds to produce smoke. Whether the Ice Princess's cannabis was intended for similar purposes, served medicinal functions to manage pain, or held some other significance remains uncertain. But its deliberate inclusion in burial goods indicated it was valued. The quality and variety of her possessions painted a picture of a woman with high social standing, access to luxury goods, and connections to far-flung trade networks. She wasn't simply wealthy, but occupied a position that commanded resources and respect sufficient to warrant an elaborate burial that her community invested considerable effort to create. Analysis of the Ice Princess's role in Paziric society increasingly pointed toward her being a shaman, a spiritual specialist who mediated between the physical and supernatural worlds. Multiple lines of evidence supported this interpretation, from her tattoos to her burial goods to the exceptional nature of her internment. Shamanism was widespread among ancient Siberian and Central Asian peoples. Shamans served as healers, spiritual guides, and intermediaries with supernatural forces. They underwent extensive training, often including prolonged isolation, fasting, and experiences with psychoactive substances that induced altered states of consciousness. Successful shamans gained prestige and influence, sometimes rivaling or exceeding that of political leaders. The Ice Princess's tattoos align closely with shamanic symbolism. The animal designs weren't mere decoration, but represented spirit guides, supernatural entities that shamans could communicate with or embody during trance states. The deer, snow leopard, and hybrid creatures covering her skin suggested she claimed connections to multiple spirit realms and possessed the power to transform or travel between worlds. Her cannabis possession gains new significance when viewed through a shamanic lens. Across many cultures, shamans used psychoactive plants to induce trance states that facilitated communication with spirits or enabled soul journeys. The Paziric people's access to cannabis and apparent ritual use suggested their shamans employed it as a sacred tool rather than mere recreation. The 6 horses buried with her probably weren't simply status symbols, but held shamanic significance. In Siberian shamanic traditions, horses represented the shaman's ability to journey between worlds. The number 6 might have corresponded to directional symbolism, the 4 cardinal directions plus above and below, suggesting her power extended in all directions and across cosmic realms. Her burial's remote location on the Ukok Plateau supports the shamanic interpretation. Sacred spaces in shamanic cultures were often located at boundaries, between territories, between earth and sky, or in locations considered spiritually powerful. The Ukok Plateau, sitting at the intersection of multiple territories at extreme altitude, fit this pattern perfectly. Burying her there placed her at a cosmic crossroads, where she could continue her guardian role, even in death. The elaborate headdress she wore resembled crowns worn by shamans across Siberia in more recent historical periods. The height and animal decorations weren't fashion, but spiritual technology. The headdress helped the shaman contact spirits, frightened, malevolent entities, and physically marked the wearer's special status as someone who walked between worlds. Her young age at death, approximately 25 years, might seem to contradict the shamanic interpretation, as shamans typically gained authority through years of experience. However, in some traditions, shamans were chosen through signs appearing in youth or even infancy. A person marked by spirits might begin training young and achieve high status while still young, if their power was recognized as exceptional. The preservation of her body through freezing might not have been accidental. If the Pazyryk people understood that certain burial locations froze, they might have deliberately chosen such sites for important shamans, believing preservation of the physical body would help preserve the spiritual power, or allow the deceased to continue functioning as a guardian or intermediary. Her identification as a shaman, rather than simply a noblewoman, changes how we understand Pazyryk society. It suggests spiritual authority could equal or exceed political power, that women could hold positions of supreme importance, and that the Pazyryk people invested heavily in spiritual practices that modern archaeology is only beginning to understand. Understanding the Ice Princess requires reconstructing the daily realities of Pazyryk life in one of the world's most challenging environments. The Altai Mountains presented formidable obstacles while offering resources that supported a distinctive nomadic culture. The Pazyryk people were pastoralists, moving seasonally with herds of horses, sheep, and goats. This lifestyle wasn't primitive, but represented sophisticated adaptation to highland environments where agriculture was impossible. They developed portable housing, felt-covered wooden yurts that could be assembled and dismantled quickly, and created complex systems for managing large herds across vast territories. Their diet relied heavily on animal products. Mare's milk, fermented into an alcoholic beverage called kumis, provided nutrition and hydration. Meat from sheep and goats, supplemented by wild game, offered protein and fat, essential for surviving brutal winters. During brief summers, they gathered wild plants, berries, and possibly cultivated small gardens near temporary settlements. Textile production was a constant occupation, particularly for women. Sheep wool had to be sheared, cleaned, carded, spun into thread, and either woven or felted into fabric. This labor-intensive process produced the clothing, yurt covers, and other textiles essential for survival. The fine quality of Pazyryk textiles found in burials demonstrates they'd refined these techniques to a high art. Horse culture defined Pazyryk identity. They bred horses selectively for strength, endurance, and temperament. Pazyryk riders were legendary across the ancient world for their skill. They could shoot arrows accurately from galloping horses, perform complex maneuvers in coordination with other riders, and maintain control in difficult terrain. This equestrian expertise made them formidable warriors and enabled their nomadic lifestyle. Trade connections enriched Pazyryk material culture beyond what local resources alone could provide. They exported furs, leather goods, and horses, receiving in return Chinese silk, Persian metalwork, and goods from across Eurasia. These trade networks required diplomatic relationships with neighboring peoples and knowledge of distant routes and markets. The embalming practices used on the Ice Princess reveal sophisticated understanding of preservation. After death, her internal organs were removed through incisions, the body cavity was filled with peat and aromatic herbs, and the skin was stitched closed. This process prevented decomposition long enough for the elaborate funeral ceremonies and subsequent freezing to preserve her permanently. The knowledge required to perform such procedures suggests specialized practitioners, perhaps shamans or dedicated mortuary specialists. Social organization combined egalitarian and hierarchical elements. While shamans and successful warriors gained prestige, archaeological evidence suggests wealth wasn't extremely concentrated. Most graves contain similar basic goods, with exceptional burials like the Ice Princess's being rare. This pattern suggests a relatively egalitarian society, with occasional individuals achieving extraordinary status through spiritual power or other accomplishments. As astronomical knowledge was essential for survival, the Pazyryk people needed to track seasons accurately to time migrations, predict weather, and plan activities. The star patterns carved on some artifacts and the careful orientation of burial structures suggest they observed celestial phenomena systematically and incorporated astronomical knowledge into spiritual beliefs. Artistic expression permeated daily life. The animal-style decorations appeared on everything from horse harnesses to clothing to weapons. This wasn't merely aesthetic, but reinforced cultural identity, communicated spiritual beliefs, and demonstrated craftsmanship. A well-decorated tool or garment proclaimed both the owner's status and the maker's skill. Survival in the Altai required cooperation. The extreme climate, dangerous terrain, and challenges of nomadic pastoralism meant individuals couldn't survive alone. Extended family groups, or clans, formed the basic social unit, pooling labor and resources. Larger gatherings occurred seasonally for trade, ceremonies, and possibly coordination of movement across territories shared by multiple groups. Modern medical technology, applied to the Ice Princess's preserved remains, revealed a life marked by chronic suffering and a death that came tragically young. These findings transformed her from an abstract archaeological specimen into a sympathetic individual whose pain echoes across millennia. MRI scans and CT imaging allowed researchers to examine her internal anatomy without invasive procedures. The scans revealed she died at approximately 25 years old, confirmed through dental development and bone fusion patterns. This young age made her elaborate burial even more striking. She'd achieved exceptional status despite limited years. The most significant medical finding was evidence of breast cancer. Imaging revealed tumors in her breast tissue and possible metastases to other organs. In the Iron Age, with no effective cancer treatments, such a diagnosis was a death sentence. She would have experienced increasing pain, weakness, and awareness that her condition was fatal. Additional evidence showed she'd suffered a traumatic injury relatively shortly before death. Her shoulder showed signs of a fracture consistent with falling from a horse, an occupational hazard for a nomadic people who spent much of their lives mounted. This injury would have caused severe pain and might have limited her mobility during her final weeks or months. The combination of chronic disease and acute injury painted a picture of considerable suffering. Yet the care taken in her burial and the resources devoted to it suggested her community valued her despite, or perhaps because of, her afflictions. In shamanic traditions across Siberia, chronic illness was sometimes interpreted as a sign of spiritual power, the physical toll of mediating between worlds. Her cannabis possession gains additional context when viewed through her medical situation. Modern research demonstrates cannabis can help manage chronic pain. Whether the Pazyryk people understood this therapeutic application or used cannabis primarily for spiritual purposes, it might have provided her some relief during her illness. The decision to bury her on the remote Ukok Plateau, rather than in more accessible locations, raises questions. Was the site chosen for spiritual significance, viewing it as particularly appropriate for someone of her status? Or did her community fear her spiritual power, believing burial in an isolated location would prevent her spirit from returning to trouble the living? The funeral itself would have been an enormous undertaking. Transporting her body, the 6 horses, and all the burial goods to the plateau required significant logistical effort. Excavating the burial chamber in rocky soil at high altitude demanded hard labor from many people. The elaborate preparations, embalming, creating burial clothes, and the headdress, crafting the decorated coffin, represented hundreds of hours of skilled work. This investment suggests the Pazyryk people valued her highly enough to devote substantial communal resources to honoring her death. Whether this reflected genuine affection, respect for her spiritual power, or fear requiring proper propitiation, remains uncertain. Probably all three motivations played roles, creating complex attitudes towards someone who'd wielded supernatural authority. The horses buried with her had been killed specifically for the funeral. Their remains showed no signs of disease or injury that would have caused natural death. Sacrificing 6 valuable animals represented tremendous expense. In nomadic pastoralist societies, horses were wealth itself. Killing them demonstrated the community's willingness to sacrifice material resources to ensure proper funeral rites. Her physical appearance, reconstructed through facial reconstruction technology applied to her skull, showed a woman who would have been considered attractive by both ancient and modern standards. High cheekbones, a strong jawline, and features suggesting mixed ancestry between European and Asian populations created a distinctive appearance that modern viewers find striking. Almost immediately after the Ice Princess's removal from her tomb, a series of unsettling events began that local Altai people interpreted as manifestations of an ancient curse. These incidents created ongoing controversy about the ethics of disturbing ancient burials and raised questions about the relationship between scientific research and indigenous spiritual beliefs. The Altai people, indigenous to the region, had long held beliefs about the Ukok Plateau's sacred nature. Traditional accounts described it as a boundary between worlds, a place where the living shouldn't disturb the dead. When they learned archaeologists had opened the Ice Princess's tomb, many expressed alarm, warning that removing her would anger spirits and bring disaster. Within months of the excavation, a severe earthquake struck the Altai region, the strongest in living memory. Buildings collapsed, people died, and communities that had existed for generations were devastated. Local people immediately connected the earthquake to the Ice Princess's disturbance, viewing it as her revenge or the spirit's punishment for violating sacred ground. The helicopter transporting the Ice Princess's body to a research facility experienced a near-catastrophic mechanical failure. The pilot managed an emergency landing, but the incident frightened everyone involved. Given that helicopters flew the region routinely without major problems, the timing seemed ominous to those who believed in the curse. Several members of the archaeological team fell seriously ill in the years following the excavation. While illness among aging researchers isn't unusual, the pattern seemed suspicious to curse believers. Dr. Polosmak herself suffered health problems that some attributed to the Ice Princess's displeasure, though medical explanations were available for her conditions. Indigenous Altai groups organized protests and petitions demanding the Ice Princess's return to the plateau for reburial. They argued that her removal violated their sacred sites, disrupted spiritual guardians, and brought misfortune that would continue until she was returned. The protests created political pressure on Russian authorities and sparked debates about cultural property and indigenous rights. The controversy highlighted tensions between scientific research and indigenous spiritual beliefs. From a scientific perspective, the Ice Princess represented an invaluable opportunity to learn about ancient cultures through methods impossible if she remained buried. From the Altai perspective, some knowledge isn't worth the spiritual cost, and respecting the dead matters more than satisfying curiosity. Some Altai spiritual leaders described the Ice Princess as a guardian, a powerful shaman who'd been placed on the plateau specifically to protect the region. By removing her, archaeologists had eliminated this protection, leaving the area vulnerable to disasters both natural and supernatural. The subsequent earthquakes seemed to validate this interpretation. The curse narrative became international news, attracting attention from media fascinated by stories combining archaeology, indigenous beliefs, and mysterious disasters. This publicity brought the Altai people's concerns to global attention, but also subjected their beliefs to skepticism and ridicule from those who dismissed curse narratives as superstition. Scientific researchers attempted to address concerns while maintaining their ability to study the Ice Princess. They emphasized the knowledge gained, information about ancient cultures, medical conditions, trade networks, and artistic traditions that would be impossible to obtain otherwise. They argued that studying her honored rather than disrespected her by ensuring her people weren't forgotten. But indigenous critics countered that Western science's priorities didn't align with their values. They argued that knowledge acquisition didn't justify violating sacred spaces, that some things should remain undisturbed, regardless of potential discoveries, and that the Ice Princess had a right to rest undisturbed as her people had intended. The debate continues, raising profound questions about who owns the past, whether scientific knowledge justifies disturbing the dead, and how modern societies should balance competing values when they conflict. The Ice Princess has become a symbol of these larger issues, her frozen body caught between worlds not just spiritually, but politically and ethically. The scientific analysis of the Ice Princess and her burial goods revealed extraordinary details about Pazyryk culture, ancient technologies, and the conditions that preserved her so perfectly. Each discovery added layers to our understanding, while raising new questions. Chemical analysis of the embalming materials used on her body identified a complex mixture of substances. The internal cavity had been filled with peat moss, which has natural antibacterial properties. Mixed with the peat were various aromatic herbs, including coriander, which both masked decomposition odors and possessed mild preservative qualities. The combination demonstrated sophisticated empirical knowledge about preservation techniques. Examination of her stomach contents revealed partially digested plant material, including flower petals. This unexpected finding suggested the Altai region 2,400 years ago had a more temperate climate than today, supporting flowering plants that currently don't grow at such high altitudes. The presence of flowers also raised questions about whether she'd eaten them deliberately, possibly for medicinal purposes, or they'd been included in a final meal. The permafrost's formation and maintenance proved crucial to preservation. After burial, water seeped into the tomb, froze, and created an ice lens that remained frozen even during summer due to the tomb's depth and the plateau's high altitude. Climate analysis suggested this preservation was likely intentional. The Pazyryk people probably understood that burial in certain locations resulted in permanent freezing. Textile analysis revealed weaving techniques that were remarkably advanced for their time. The silk showed evidence of complex looms capable of creating intricate patterns. The wool felt demonstrated understanding of fiber properties and processing methods that produced material with specific desired characteristics, waterproofing, insulation, or decorative appearance. The tattoo pigment analysis identified carbon-based ink, probably created from soot or charcoal. The pigment had been mixed with a liquid vehicle, possibly animal fat, that helped it penetrate skin layers. The precision of the linework suggested purpose-designed tools, possibly bone needles of specific sizes and shapes, optimized for tattooing. Cannabis analysis confirmed it was cultivated rather than wild, showing selective breeding for characteristics the Pazyryk valued, possibly higher psychoactive compound concentrations. This demonstrated the Pazyryk people practiced sophisticated agriculture despite being primarily pastoralists, cultivating specific plants for ritual or medicinal purposes. The horse's preservation allowed detailed analysis of ancient animal husbandry. The horses showed selective breeding characteristics. They were relatively small but robust, built for endurance and mountain terrain rather than speed. Their teeth revealed diet patterns, their bones showed work stress from carrying riders, and their ceremonial gear demonstrated the importance of horses in Pazyryk culture and funeral practices. Wood analysis of the coffin and burial chamber identified larch, a tree species prized for durability and resistance to decay. The logs used were old growth, probably selected specifically for burial construction. The carving techniques showed metal tools were used, confirming the Pazyryk people had access to iron technology. The gold decorations on her headdress underwent metallurgical analysis, revealing high purity and sophisticated working techniques. The gold had been hammered into thin foils, cut into shapes, and attached to felt backing, techniques requiring specialized knowledge and tools. The gold source remained uncertain, but probably came from local deposits in the Altai region. Bone analysis revealed information about her diet throughout life. Isotopic ratios indicated she consumed mostly animal products, with limited plant foods, consistent with pastoral nomadic lifestyle. The ratios also showed she'd lived her entire life in the Altai region, rather than migrating from distant areas. The scientific record documented extraordinary preservation of organic materials rarely found in archaeological contexts: skin, internal organs, food remains, textiles, and wooden objects. This preservation created an unprecedented window into Iron Age life, revealing details that wouldn't survive in normal burial conditions. The Ice Princess became the center of an ongoing dispute about cultural property, indigenous rights, and scientific access to archaeological materials. Russian scientists wanted her preserved in climate-controlled facilities where research could continue. Altai indigenous groups demanded her return to traditional territory for reburial according to proper customs. A specialized refrigeration chamber was constructed to maintain her at constant freezing temperatures. The facility required significant resources to build and maintain, but was considered essential for preservation. Scientists argued that returning her to burial would end research opportunities and risk losing invaluable information. Facial reconstruction technology created a visualization of her living appearance. The reconstruction showed a woman with mixed European and Asian features, high cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes, and a strong facial structure. The image helped humanize her, transforming her from specimen to person, which both aided scientific communication and strengthened indigenous claims that she deserved respect as an ancestor. Indigenous Altai groups organized as the Ukok Princess movement, demanding her return and recognition of their cultural rights. The movement gained political support and international attention, forcing Russian authorities to negotiate. In 2012, she was moved to a specially built facility in the Altai Republic capital, Gorno-Altaisk, a compromise that kept her in Altai territory while maintaining scientific access. The resolution satisfied neither side completely, but represented acknowledgement that both scientific and indigenous interests deserved consideration. The Ice Princess remains a symbol of ongoing debates about how modern societies should balance competing values when studying the past. DNA analysis, finally conducted in the 2010s, provided definitive answers about the Ice Princess's ancestry and relationship to modern populations. Genetic material extracted from soft tissue revealed she belonged to haplogroups common in ancient Samoyedic and Indo-European populations, confirming the Pazyryk people represented a mix of Eastern and Western Eurasian ancestries. Her genetic profile didn't match modern Altai populations closely, suggesting the Pazyryk culture either disappeared, was absorbed into other groups, or migrated away from the region. This finding supported historical accounts describing major population movements across the Eurasian steppes during the Iron Age. The DNA confirmed she wasn't purely Asian or European, but represented the complex population mixing that characterized ancient steppe peoples. These groups facilitated cultural and genetic exchange across vast distances, creating hybrid populations that don't fit neat modern categories. Genetic analysis also revealed she possessed variants associated with certain physical characteristics and possibly disease susceptibilities. While interpretation required caution, the data suggested populations adapted to high-altitude environments and pastoral lifestyles. The final message: the Ice Princess wasn't a curse, but a messenger from a lost world. Her frozen body preserved not just herself, but knowledge about human diversity, cultural sophistication, and the complex histories of peoples who left few written records. Though ice may melt, the secrets she's revealed will remain frozen in human memory, teaching us that the past is neither simple nor distant, but intimately connected to who we are today.